Let's return to the Grenfell Tower fire and the final report from the 7-year-long inquiry. And before we talk to our reporter, Nick Ellaby, at the report, her publication right now, let's hear a few words from Sir Martin Moore-Bick, the chair of the inquiry, talking about what happened and who's responsible. This is what he had to say.
The simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by those who were responsible for ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants. They include the government, the tenant management organisation, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, those who manufactured and supplied the materials used in the refurbishment, those who certified their suitability for use on high-rise buildings, the architect, the principal contractor, and some of its subcontractors, in particularly Harley Curtain Wall and its successor Harley Facades, some of the consultants, in particular the fire engineer ex-over Warrington Fire, the local authority's building control department, and the London Fire Brigade.
Well, that is a damning list of those involved. Pretty much anyone and everyone who had anything whatsoever to do with Grenfell Tower is having the finger pointed at them. Well, let's talk to our talk correspondent, Nick Ellaby. He was able to read the report in advance, joins us right now. It came out at 11 o'clock, and Sir Martin Moore-Bick has been giving a statement. We're going to be hearing from some of the victims' groups as well, Nick. But there's no doubt at all this is a hefty report. It's a detailed report, and he's pointed the finger at pretty much everybody involved, hasn't he?
Yes, good morning, Julia. Certainly a hefty report. I mean, the whole thing weighs about 10 kilos. We were given also a summary of it as well, which I've been looking through this morning. And as you've been hearing from the chair there, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, pointing the finger at a number of organisations and professionals in the industry. And really, that top line there of 72 deaths, in the summer of 2017, Grenfell Tower, all unavoidable. And the chair there saying that the residents were failed over a number of years by government organisations, by the professionals. And it's, in terms of the government, he's called the Department for Communities and Local Government badly run. And the report details that it was well aware of the fire safety risks of that material, the cladding and the insulation in that tower from 2016. And indeed, there'd been a number of other fires involving cladding back in 1991, Knowsley Heights in Liverpool. So the government had been aware of these problems for, 25 years, but had failed to act on that. And then in terms of those companies that sold and provided the cladding and the insulation, the report details systematic dishonesty. Some of those professionals gave evidence to the inquiry, 400 days of evidence it was in total, saying that they didn't mislead the market and the public, but the report finds that that's not true, actually, and testing was misrepresentative. Yeah. And the company that provided the cladding knew from 2013 that it was very combustible, and similar with the companies providing the insulation as well. And
but it was cheaper.
Brigade, and it's
Yeah, it was cheaper, and they'd make more money. They could put in a lower bid. They'd get the work, and that's what they did for the role, for Kensington and Chelsea to get the work. They put in the lowest bid, and they were basically going to claw back that money by making savings. And this is the thing that's so extraordinary. It's not just people not really paying much attention and not doing their job very well. As you say, it's systemic dishonesty. The retired judge said, from cladding and insulation firms, but an abject failure by all the regulatory bodies, the council to look into this properly, to sign this off properly, and regulation by central government.
Yeah, and you mentioned the testing and the regulatory bodies. Actually, there's a real a damning accusation in the report that the governmental bodies that were in charge of that testing, working with the companies and the contractors, actually were complicit in misrepresenting testing, and even in one case allowing a company to add their own flame retardant boards to the material during the tests, but then sell that cladding without the fire retardant material, thus rendering the tests completely useless. And actually, another thing I thought was interesting, you mentioned the local borough of Kensington and Chelsea, who've been accused of cutting corners and cutting costs and really neglecting the residents in that tower block. But also, the report found the people that emerged with the greatest credit are the local community groups, the volunteer groups that provided much needed care and support to those families and the bereaved in the hours and the days following the fire. And in terms of the recommendations, Julia, the report is recommending that all fire safety is brought under a single Secretary of State to have some better joined-up approach on all this, and also a College of Fire Safety be set up, more fire engineers, that job of fire engineer be better recognised, and that the UK train up more of them, and also the housing management companies have better plans to evacuate people who need assistance, because we've heard some of the harrowing stories of the people that weren't able to get out of that tower block, partly due to the London Fire Brigades not lifting their stay-put order till some 1 hour 45 minutes after they were called, but also their inability to get out of that block, and some of those people that were forced to shelter in the top floor flat, including a 12-year-old girl, Jessica Urbano Ramirez, who called the fire department many times and had to relocate. The fire officers couldn't reach her, and also the report details that some of those officers were not given adequate training, and actually the payout, the cost of this report so far is higher than the payouts given to the bereaved and the families in Grenfell. And what those families want to see is a criminal investigation, and this inquiry has delayed that investigation, and I don't think we're going to see any criminal proceedings, and certainly any charges, until 2027. That's a full decade after the report, and it's just raking up all this terrible, painful memories for everybody involved.
Yeah, indeed. And at the same time, 340,000 people still living in 11,000 blocks, buildings that which still have similar cladding, still at risk, nothing having been done. It's an abject failure before, during and after. You mentioned the fire brigade. They just must mention, though, they did come in for criticism, and they have previously in the phase 1 report, failure, the stay put advice. But again, that was based on what they thought the building, was. They thought that, fire safety measures were in place, that it didn't have flammable, combustible cladding on the outside. Why would you think it did? Who would do that, But failure to adjust that, it was sort of the computer says no attitude, which did cost lives and risk the lives of many firefighters as well, who didn't have the full equipment they needed. But again, there is literally nobody involved in authority at all in this who comes out of this with anything other than, blood on their hands.
No, absolutely not. I mean, you mentioned the individual firefighters were doing very difficult job in really unbelievable circumstances, and the report details a lack of training given to those officers, but it does say a chronic lack of effective management and leadership at the London Fire Brigade. The woman in charge did actually leave her post earlier than she intended to because of this, but there are recommendations that I think really the problem was that the lack of integration with what was going on in the control room and what the firefighters were getting and the information they were getting on the ground, and also some of their communications had went down. The report also recommends that all firefighters have digital radios, so they do keep those communications if anything like this, God forbid, were to happen again.
I mean, that's the thing, so many of these recommendations are just so basic and such common sense and stuff that I think we all thought would have been in place already, and it's taken 7 years. We know a lot of those recommendations were also made in phase 1 report a few years ago, so that have actually already been enacted. But as you say, the families, those who are bereaved, those affected, still waiting for justice to be done. I mean, certainly, we need people to be put behind bars. It's as simple as that. Nick Ellaby, I know you're going to be talking to us throughout the rest of the day. Really appreciate you joining us there. He's live from Dorland House, where we've seen that massive big report published.